Hello guys! Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is NAT or Liam, and NAT stands for Nats and Liam stands for Lem. And today we're going to be reading chapter 6 of, I always forget. I've been forgetting a little bit. But I don't mind what you call me as long as it's not anything weird. Honestly. So let's read chapter 6 of the memoir by Michelle Sonner, Crying in H-Mart. Dark matter. This could be my chance, I thought. To make amends for everything, for all the burdens I'd imposed as a hyperactive child, for all the vitriol I'd spooze as a tortured teen, for hiding in department stores, throwing tantrums in public, destroying her favorite objects, for stealing the car, coming home on mushrooms, drunk, driving into a ditch. I would radiate joy and positivity, and it would cure her. I would wear whatever she wanted, complete every chore without protest. I will learn to cook for her all the things she loved to eat, and I would single-handedly keep her from withering away. I would repay her for all the debts that occurred. I would be everything she ever needed. I would make her sorry for not ever wanting me to be there. I would be the perfect daughter. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, my father was able to arrange an appointment at MD Anderson, and my parents flew to Houston. With better imaging, they discovered my mother did not have pancreatic cancer, but a rare form of stage IV squamous mouse cell carcinoma that had likely originated in the bile duct. The doctors told them if they had moved forward with the surgery the first doctor suggested, she would have bled out on the operating table. The recommended course of action now was to return home and hit it with a 3-drug Molotov cocktail, then follow up with radiation if the results were positive. My mom was only 56 and, despite the cancer, relatively healthy. They felt if they went too strong, there was a possibility she could still beat it. Back in Eugene, my mom sent me a photo of her new pixie cut. She'd had the same haircut. She'd had the same hairstyle for more than 10 years. Simple, straight, and falling just below her shoulders. Sometimes she'd wear it in a loose ponytail, often with a visor or sun hat in the summer, a beanie or a little newsboy cap in the fall. Aside from the perm she had when she was younger, I'd never seen it styled any other way. "It suits you," I messaged back ecstatically, following up with a number of enamored animated emojis. "You look younger. Mia Farrow." I meant it. In the photo, she was smiling, posing in front of a white wall in the living room, near the kitchen counter where my parents kept their car keys and a landline. There was a plastic port on her chest, its edges secured with clear medical tape. She looked almost coy. Her expression was hopeful, her posture slightly bent, and it made me hopeful too. In spite of my mother's initial objections, I quit my 3 jobs, sublet my apartment, and put the band on hiatus. My plan was to spend the summer in Eugene and return to Philadelphia in August for a 2-week tour. By then, I would have a better idea of what my family and I were in for, and whether or not I should move out indefinitely. In the interim, Peter would visit. I landed in Eugene in the afternoon, the day after my mother's first chemotherapy infusion. I'd done my best to look poised and put together, spending my layover at the San Francisco airport in front of the woman's room mirror. I washed my face in the sink and dabbed it dry with a rough paper towel. I brushed my hair and reapplied my makeup, cautiously lining my lids with the thinnest flick of a cat eye I could manage. I took the lint roller out of my carry-on and rolled the sticky paper over my jeans and picked out the pills on my sweater. I smoothed the wrinkles as best as I could with the palms of my hands. I put more effort into composing myself for my mother than for any date or job interview. I had prepared for a business this way since college. When I'd returned home for winter and summer breaks in December of my freshman year, I carefully polished a pair of cowboy boots she sent me, dipping a soft cloth into the waxy paste they came with and running it over the leather, blending it in small circles with the bristles of a wooden brush. Though my mother and I hadn't parted on good terms, once a month huge boxes would arrive, reminders I was never far from her mind. Sweet honey-puffed rice, 24 packs of individually wrapped seasoned seaweed, microwavable rice, shrimp crackers, box of pepperoni, and cups of shin ramen I would subsist on for weeks on end. In an effort to avoid the dining hall, she sent clothing steamers, lint rollers, BB creams, packages of socks, a new "This Is Nice" brand skirt she found on sale at TJ Maxx. The cowboy boots arrived in one of these packages after my parents had vacation in Mexico. When I slipped them on, I discovered they had already been broken in. My mother had worn them around the house for a week, smoothing the hard edges in 2 pairs of socks for an hour every day, molding the flat sole at the bottom of her feet, wearing in the stiffness, breaking the tough leather to spare me all discomfort. I feel like despite the fact that her mother has been trying to not talk to her as most as she did in the past, especially due to their like strain in their relationship, the fact that her mom was like so like helpful when it came to the couple beats, that's kind of cute and kind of sweet, to be fair. So I stood before the full-length mirror in my dorm room and scanned myself for errors, scouring my outfit for snags and loose threads. I tried to see myself through my mother's shrewd eye, pinpoint the parts of me she'd pick apart. I wanted to impress her, to demonstrate how much I'd grown, and how I could thrive without her. I wanted to return an adult. My mom prepared for our reunions in her own way, marinating short rib 2 days before my arrival. She filled the fridge with my favorite side dishes and bought my favorite radish kimchi weeks in advance, leaving it out on the counter for days so it was extra fermented and tart by the time I got home. Tender short rib, soused in sesame oil, sweet syrup, and soda, and caramelized in the pan, filled the kitchen with a rich, smoky scent. My mother rinsed fresh red leaf lettuce and set it on the glass-top coffee table in front of me, then brought the banchan, hard-boiled soy sauce eggs, sliced in half, crunchy bean sprouts flavored with scallions and sesame oil, doenjang jjigae with extra broth, and chonggak kimchi perfectly soured. Julia, the golden retriever we'd had since I was 12, fell onto her back, paws up, submitting her giant stomach in a pose my mother always referred to as breast up. While my mother grilled the galbi, I would always associate with the taste of home. Julia's getting fat, I said, running my hand over her protruding belly. You're feeding her too much. I only give her dog food, and just a little bit of rice. She's a Korean dog. She loves her rice. Blissfully, I laid my palm flat, blanketed it with a piece of lettuce, and dressed it just the way I liked. A piece of glistening short rib, a spoonful of warm rice, a dredge of samjang, and a thin slice of raw garlic. I folded it into a perfect little satchel and popped it into my mouth. I closed my eyes and savored the first few chews, my taste buds and stomach having been deprived for months of a home-cooked meal. The rice alone was a miraculous reunion, the cooker having imbued each kernel with textual autonomy, distinguishing it from the gluey, microwavable bowls I'd been surviving on in my dorm room. My mother lingered to take in my expression. Tastes good? Masiseo? She opened a package of seaweed and placed it next to my rice bowl. Jinja masiseo, I said, my mouth still half full, fainting in dramatic appreciation. My mother sat behind me on the couch, pushing my hair behind my shoulders and out of my face. They gorged ravenously on the bounties of the feast. It was a familiar touch, her cool and sticky hand soothed with cream, one I found myself no longer lurching away from, but leaning into. It was as if I possessed a new internal core that gravitated toward her affection, its charge renewed by the time I'd spent away from its fields. I found myself eager to please her again, savoring the laughter she broke into as I regaled her with stories about confronting adulthood, drawing out the details of my ineptitude. Had I shrunk a sweater 2 sizes in the wash, had I taken myself out to a fancy lunch and accidentally spent $12 on sparkling water, thinking it was complimentary. Admission set surrendered. Mom, you were right. As I descended the escalator of the Eugene airport, I half expected my mother to be waiting for me like she used to, alone in the terminal just beyond security, waving as I came into view. She'd always be there to get me, dressed neatly in all black with a large fox fur vest and huge tortoiseshell sunglasses, looking out of place among the other residents of Eugene in their baggy green Oregon Duck hoodies. Instead, I found my father outside, parked by the baggage claim exit. Hey, bud, he said. He gave me a hug and lifted my suitcase in the trunk. How's she doing? She's okay. She went in for chemo yesterday. Says she just feels a little weak. We were quiet in the car and I rolled down the window to take a deep breath of Oregon air. It was warm and smelled like cut grass and empty. In the beginning of summer, we drove past a long stretch of empty fields and the big box stores on the outskirts of town, past the home of a best friend I no longer knew, repainted now, the lawn fenced in. Per usual, my dad drove aggressively, weaving in and out of traffic at odds with the naturally slow pace of the small college town. It felt strange to be together without my mother. The two of us never spent much time alone. My father was happy as a provider. His mere existence in our lives was testament enough to how he transcended into his own upbringing and overcame his addictions, and that counted for something. As a kid, I was enthralled with stories of his past, his machismo and grit. He would regale me with with the fights of his youth, sparing no detail. How he'd once blinded a man, how he'd been held at knife point, how he'd stayed up for 23 days on a speed bender, living under the boardwalk. He rode a Harley and wore an earring, and his stokiness always made me feel safe and protected. And he could drink. After work, he'd hold court at the Highlands, a local bar across from his office. He could knock back shots of tequila and half a dozen beers like it was nothing, and the next morning appear completely unscathed. Unlike my mother, he tried to raise me with indifference to gender, teaching me how to ball a fist and how to build a fire. When I was 10, he even bought me my own Yamaha 80C motorbike so I could follow him along the muddy circuit in the backyard. I have the same thing with my father. Whenever I find anything new about him, I love chanting about it, because it's like you barely get to know much about some of your parents. Some of your parents, they tend to keep stuff from them to themselves because, I don't know, they want to keep this like view of power or whatever, right? Like, oh, I'm just your parent, nothing else. But it's always nice to know them as a person rather than like a parent, I guess, you know. So whenever, that's what I relate to. I love my father, But for most of my childhood, he was away at work or at the bar. When he was home, most of his time was spent roaring into its phone, looking for a missing pallet of strawberries or trying to find out why a truckload of romaine was running 3 days behind. Over time, our conversations became a lot like explaining a movie to someone who has walked in on the last 30 minutes. My father often blamed his work for the distance that grew between us. I was 10 when he took over his brother's business, and his workload practically doubled. But the truth was, his new position coincided with the purchase of our family's first desktop computer, which was when I first stumbled across the paid affairs he'd been scheduling with women online. It was a secret I kept from my mother my entire life. Even at a young age, I was quick to rationalize my father's infidelity. He was a man with needs, and I assumed my parents must have come to some sort of understanding. But as I grew older, the secret began to fester. The same stories grew tiresome and repetitive. His violent past less the exploits of a hero than excuses for his shortcoming. His constant lack of sobriety was no longer endearing. The drunk driving after work, irresponsible. What had been a delight as a child fell short of what I needed from a father as an adult. We were not innately intrinsically intertwined the way I was with my mother, and now that she was sick, I wasn't sure of how we'd manage to pull through together. That's true, because as a child, you don't really think about like how something's affecting you or how, you know, something's bad. It's more like, oh, cool, or like, this is new, I didn't know this is amazing. Oh, that's kind of sad. Okay, we headed up Willamette Street, clearing the steep hill that passed the sloping cemetery. The pavement changed where a sign marked the end of the city limits in a sequence I'd seen 1,000 times unfurled. There were still the same bends where deer were likely to jump, the straightaways where my dad would try to pass slow-moving Volvos and Subarus headed up to Spencer Butte, then the winding stretch of guardrail in the clearing where hills of yellowing grass opened west to the uninterrupted sunsets, up and up, the pines taking over, obscuring the houses behind them, past the Butte and Duckworth's nursery where peacocks roamed freely through the groves of potted trees and shrubs, past the Christmas tree farm on Fox Hollow Road and down the gravel path covered by a canopy of trees and ferns and moss all growing into one another like a lattice until the lush mass broke open to our home. Dad parked the car and I hurried inside, lining my shoes up neatly in the mud room. I called out to her as I entered through the kitchen, and she stood up from the couch. "Hello, my baby," she called back to me. I went to her, embracing her cautiously. I felt the hard plastic port between us. I ran my hand over her hair. "It looks so good," I said. "I love it." She sat back down and slinked off the leather couch and sat on the rug between her and the coffee table. Julia panted beside us, her tongue lobbing over the missing canine my father had accidentally knocked out a few years ago, driving golf balls off the driveway tee. I hugged my mother's calves and leaned my head on her lap. I'd expected our reunion to be emotional, but she seemed calm and unmoved. "How do you feel?" I feel fine, she said. I feel a little weak, but I feel fine. You have to eat a lot to keep your health up. I want to learn how to make all the Korean dishes you like. Oh yes, you becoming such a good cook from the picture you've been sending me. Tomorrow morning, how about you make me some fresh tomato juice? I buy 2 or 3 organic tomatoes and I blend it in the Vitamix with some honey and ice. Tastes so good. Lately, I've been making that one. Tomato juice, got it. In 2 weeks, Mommy's friend Kai is going to come, and then maybe she can teach you how to make some Korean foods. Kai was my mother's friend for my parents' trip time in Japan. She was a few years older than my mother and had taken her under her wing while my father worked the car lots in Misawa. She showed her where to shop, where to drink, how to drive, and how to side hustle black marketing items from the PX, the discount department store, and base where the GIs did their shopping. Coffee creamer, dish soap, fifths of foreign booze, tins of Spam. My mom would buy these rarities tax-free from the PX for $1 and flip them for $5. Sounds like drop shipping. They had lost touch after my parents moved to Germany, but reconnected a couple of years ago. She lived in Georgia now with her husband, Woody. I'd never met her, and I was excited to learn from her, to prove to my mother how useful I could be. I fantasized about the delicious food we'd make together, finally repaying my debts, giving back some of the love and care I'd taken for granted for so many years. Dishes that would comfort her and remind her of Korea, meals prepared just the way she liked them, to lift her spirits and nourish her body, and give her the strength she needed to recover. We watched television together for a while, quietly picking the thistles out of Julia's fur and searching for ticks to burn while she panted on her side, pawing at her wrists, hungry for attention every time our eyes drifted away from her and toward the screen. My mother went to bed early and I brought my bag upstairs. My bedroom was above my parents', a wide rectangle tapering into little alcoves with the hips of the roof on either side. My desk was nested into one niche, my record player cabinet and speakers and a blue cushioned window seat in the other. The alcoves were painted bright tangerine, in the middle section mint, loudly proclaiming from the upper corner of the house, "Teenage girl was here." "Stop making all the toll," my mother would scold me from the staircase as I nailed psychedelic tapestries to my ceiling, and I pinned gigantic Janis Joplin and Star Wars posters to my wall. I found the old record player cabinet and its hideous wooden speakers at Goodwill. "We can paint it," I said, thrilled at the idea of sharing a creative project with my mother. But once we got them back to the house, I was left to my own devices. I laid out newspaper in the garage and spray painted the cabinets black, and, too impatient to let them dry properly, immediately set in on large white polka dots, which of course dripped and became misshapen, rendering the impression of a melting cow. It reminded me of many such half-baked teenage failures, underscoring the point when I put on an old Leonard Cohen album on and remembered that it only played in mono. I opened the window, the screen of which I'd removed and stashed in a storage closet years ago, and climbed onto the roof. I leaned against the coarse tar paper, setting my feet above the gutter and setting myself on the slope. There were so many stars out, more brilliant than I'd ever remembered, uncorrupted by the lights of the city. The sounds of crickets and frogs resonated from below. At the other end of the roof, when my parents were sleeping, I used to slide down the columns of the portico and meet with whichever kid I'd enlisted to drive for the night. Outside, I'd bound up the gravel driveway to my liberators, engines idling, and I was free. There wasn't much to do when we snuck out. Most of the time, the kids who picked me up weren't even particularly close friends, just bored classmates or older kids with licenses who were still awake with nothing else to do. Every so often, there'd be a rave in the woods, and we'd dress in elaborate costumes and dance along with the anonymous hippies on ecstasy. Sometimes I would pilfer liquor left over from my parents' holiday parties, and like a careful chemist, siphon from the various bottles inconspicuous levels of liquid to mix with soda and drink in the park. But most of the time, we'd drive around listening to CDs, occasionally venturing as far as an hour out to Dexter Reservoir or Fern Ridge just to sit on the dock and look out at the black water, dark as oil in the night, a black expanse we'd use as a sounding board for how confused we were about ourselves and what exactly it was that we were feeling. Other nights we'd drive up to the Skinner Brute to get a good view of the dull city that kept us hostage, or drink coffee and eat grated hash browns at a 24-hour IHOP, or sneak out our way through some stranger's acreage where we'd once discovered a rope swing. Once we even drove out to the airport just to watch people at the terminal, flying off to cities where we desperately wished we could travel. A couple of nocturnal teens bonded together by a deep, inexplicable loneliness in AOL Instant Messenger. It was not lost on me how different the circumstances were now. Here I was again, this time returned of my own free will, no longer scheming a wild escape into the dark, but desperately hoping that the darkness would not come in. And that's the end of chapter 6. Chapter 6, I feel, is probably a little bit tough. It's entering like this area of like toughness that is gonna come. It's like not opening a door, but setting the road for the door that's to come, which she'll eventually open in a further chapter. So I hope you guys are excited, because I'm so excited. I actually in school now, we're on chapter 14. We're supposed to be reading chapter 14. We read chapter 14 today. We started it, so we're supposed to finish that tomorrow in school. And we also have a test tomorrow, so I really need to finish this really fast, guys. At least thanks to you all, I'm having this amazing experience while reading this book. I love reading books in school, not because it feels that it's like just a school book, but rather that it feels like I enjoy reading these books. I enjoy giving myself the time to read a book and analyze it and speak to other people about how much I like it and what I enjoy and what I don't enjoy and its differences and its great things. That's why I love school when it comes to reading. I want to thank you guys so much for watching my videos again. I thank you guys so much. And I hope you guys have a wonderful, spectacular day. You guys are amazing and awesome, and bye.